The Shadows. At 5 feet 6 inches tall, Gerard weighed a healthy 140 pounds. Not a large man. He was physically superior in certain ways, though. He'd always had excellent hand-eye coordination and athletic quickness. He was also cute. That was the impression that many ladies had of him. That's what Sherry, his wife, believed about him. He was cute, which is why she was drawn to him. He had a quick smile, curling light brown hair, blue eyes, and an innocent-looking face. Her attractiveness, along with her great build and reddish-brown hair, drew him in. She shared his athletic prowess. She was also intelligent, kind but honest as well. When they first met as juniors in college, Sherry accepted his invitation to supper, and they clicked immediately away. After 2 dates, they were cuddling in bed. They were quite happy and compatible when they arrived. Gerard was thick, but they were about the same height. Sherry could have been an inch higher, not in a mental sense, when it mattered. His majors were creative writing and literature. Her major was business. They were married after graduation. With the money he earned from teaching at a junior college and from creating advertisements, he was able to pay for her legal education. While Gerard was a teacher, he was also a fiction writer. It started out with short stories. After that, he penned an adventure book about a little man who had undiscovered physical abilities. Regular publishers had no interest in any of it. He then published himself. One of the short stories started to gain some prominence. Next up, another. Next, the book. He began to make some money and had a lot of hits. That was beneficial for law school. Sherry did quite well in law school. An offer came in from a major DC law firm. That would require relocation, but at a cost. Gerard quit his job as a teacher, and they moved into an apartment close to her workplace. Sherry's time at the law firm was far more consumed by work than by studying. In addition to doing chores and cooking, Gerard wrote more. She worked long hours, but even so, the two were able to spend 2 or 3 fulfilling evenings together. The spouse was fostering the strongest bond either of them had ever experienced. Gerard trusted Sherry, and Sherry trusted him. However, each person's family history tended to contradict that. When Sherry was 9 years old, her biological father left the family. Following that, her mother reminded her 2 daughters of the need of continuing to be financially independent. They would not be reliant on their husband's generosity if they took that action. Gerard's mother had an extended liaison with her boss at work. She was coy at first, but finally the whole family found out. William, Gerard's father, was likewise a short man. Wendy, his mother's paramour, was tall and strong. When Gerard's younger brother enlisted in the army at the age of 18, William filed for divorce from his wife, tolerating the affair while the kids were at home. William had severed his relationship with Wendy in the interim. Rather, he married his own AP during Gerard's undergraduate years. Gerard thought his father ought to have used a firearm. He saw it as the equalizer of the small guy. After junior high school, the large males who had always been at the top of the neighborhood were replaced by weird people, guys who crossed all lines without a second thought. And in the end, the madmen were put behind bars. They were still in the lead at the moment. Nobody wanted to meddle with you if you were sufficiently insane. Nobody exposed you, either. Gerard and Sherry talked about how they would handle marriage because they had different history to take into account. Sherry was adamant about being financially independent. Gerard demanded complete loyalty. They each signed a prenuptial agreement outlining their respective financial responsibilities and outlining the consequences of breaking the fidelity clause. The main issue was custody of any children, as the finances were not related. Before getting married, they both thought the prenup would never matter, well, besides their different finances. After working at her firm for 2 years, Sherry became pregnant. Susan, a daughter, was born. Little Chadwick was born 18 months later. Sherry returned to work shortly after each baby was born. With the help of a child care provider, Gerard assumed the job of caretaker. Melanie Carter was that. She arrived at 8 o'clock 4 days a week and departed at 3 p.m. She attended the nearby community college in the evenings. Melanie was a really lovely, slim, dark-haired woman, which made Sherry feel a little concerned about her. She was also rather vivacious. In and out of bed, Gerard reassured Sherry, though, that it was a job well done by him. Sherry, though, would have rather had a grandmother figure. Gerard was able to write for 6 hours every day, 4 days a week, because to Melanie's presence. For him, that was sufficient. He had no trouble writing, but it also left him tired. He was now making a good living from his writing job. He made a little money from the stories he self-published. He was the author of 2 successful paperback novels that sold well. However, the majority of his earnings were from ghostwriting for a corporation. Under the pen name Slate Browning, he penned a 3-book thriller series. In every book, Rock Boyd, the cunning brute who repeatedly came to the rescue, was the hero. The publisher gave Gerard a regular stipend in addition to a portion of the earnings. Next, a television contract was struck for the Slate books. Gerard penned the screenplays with guidance from seasoned television writers. That worked out really well for him. Sherry, meanwhile, was moving her job toward partnership. In her 8th year, or this year, she anticipated success. The children would now be attending preschool. Melanie had stopped attending school and was working evening hours at a programming job. Her hours at the Bond home were reduced to 4 half-days each week. Melanie and Sherry had gotten along, albeit clumsily. Melanie's constant presence in the house no longer posed a threat to Sherry. Gerard and Melanie were quite close. They only spent a few years getting to know one another through intimate communication, and they discovered they were pals. Gerard never tried to acquire more, not even the tiniest. Melanie also abstained from all provocative actions with extreme caution. However, they were all aware of their unique relationship, a bond that was never meant to grow beyond that. They would laugh and play on the floor with the children as well as with each other. Melanie was dubbed Mom Mel by the children. Gerard also did so. Gerard remained deeply infatuated with Sherry. What was Sherry like? She loved Gerard for his humor and wit, and she honored her vows. Not to mention that he made her feel satisfied. The typical. Melanie went on dates every weekend. Nobody is stable. The dates fulfilled their goal, and she was a young, healthy woman. However, she discovered that she was wary of any sustained attachment. Sherry was involved in a corporate tax matter as part of her job. The CEO of her client conferred with her and her group. The IRS had handed his company a large charge because it believed the company had moved production to Ireland in order to conceal earnings. Workers in the United States produced the intellectual property, which was chemicals, and it was sent to Ireland for further writing. Afterward, returned. Simply put, a tax evasion. That would be Macaulay O'Brien, the CEO. He had dazzling blue eyes and reddish hair, and he was a very big, powerful man. When he first met Sherry, he was 42. He was immediately drawn to her, and he gave her that clear indication right away. She turned him off. She was a family woman. Back in New York, he informed her, so did he. His spouse was aware of his wants. Sherry just gave me a no. Clearly, her hubby would not get it. Although Mac didn't let it go, he also didn't allow it to get in the way of his work. He would go and forth between DC and New York. He leased a flat close to the legal practice. He encouraged Sherry to see him there every now and then when he felt it was appropriate. She said no, but she didn't bring it up to Gerard. Why should I bother him? In the end, a mediocre settlement was reached, along with an assurance from the business to stop. 10 months had passed during the lawsuit, and Sherry had turned down Mac's approaches perhaps 20 times in that period. However, she was finding it harder and harder to accomplish that. Mac was incredibly appealing and convincing. She was aware that growing close to him would satisfy her and could probably be done without Gerard's knowledge. Her marital bonding was, well, typical. Even so, she turned them down every time. There had been no kiss between the two. A few informal remarks, perhaps. That was it. Gerard was starting to worry about Sherry's friendship with Mac while the matter was still pending. The two guys had crossed paths twice when Gerard had stopped by Sherry's office early in the case. The spouses would talk about Mac and her job at home. These were not in-depth conversations, just informal. After 5 months or so, Sherry stopped talking about Mac. Gerard noticed this after about 6 months. He started focusing especially on every facet of Sherry's appearance and behavior. He did not notice much for a while. However, after 9 months of work on the case, Gerard felt Sherry was not quite right. He inquired about it from her. Sure, what's bothering you lately? Well, perhaps the tax case will resolve. Many discussions. The typical, you're always working on something. This is not like that. How come? Sherry turned to face her spouse. She became aware that she had to make a choice. Talk about her growing feelings for Mac, or don't. No big deal, she remarked. There's nothing to be concerned about. Gerard was aware of her avoidance, and he believed he understood the purpose of the avoidance. Mac, he said. Sherry sat down gently on the couch she was standing beside. No more options. What she acquired when she wed a wise man. I think he's starting to get the feel of me. He's been pursuing me nonstop. I've avoided him all my life. I'm having this now. She became quiet. Gerard just looked at her. I won't do it, Sherry declared. And Gerard's first response was, you were going to tell lies even before I brought him up. It's true that you lied. I take that to indicate that you could. It indicates that you were considering it and wanted it. Well, you've scotched any possibility, Sherry remarked. I can't possibly get away with it. But if you believed you could skate, you would screw him. It hurts me deeply. Not to be trusted. You have my affection. I refuse to participate. I'll admit that he tempts me. You two are tempted. By Mel. Gerard gave a nod. I also kept it simple. I carried it in my jeans. But stiff in your pants, Sherry said with a smirk. We're losing focus here, Gerard remarked. Mac, tell him about Bobby G. I'm not going to. He would never consider that about you. Okay, I'll have to have a meeting with him, then. No, not in a manner. I swear to you that I won't do it. I'm not letting him come near me. Tomorrow, I'll make that apparent to him. Gerard gave a nod. They went to bed shortly after. Not in contact. The Bobby G tale originated in Gerard's childhood neighborhood. Bobby G was a petite, quiet, younger man. He wasn't harassed because there was no justification for it. However, he was nuts. In his heart, he knew no bounds. Although he was aware of something about himself, he had never had the chance to show it. Not until Bobby's mother Ella was attacked by Mason Dietrich. Mason was a big, powerful man, a senior in Ella's high school class. Bobby was merely a first year. He did take a little jab about his mom, who was a pretty unmarried woman. Her only child was Bobby. Mason made the decision that Ella was his. She was ripe at 35. Mason was aware that Ella would appreciate his attentiveness. So one late day, he knocked on her door. Bobby G unlocked the door. Mason passed him completely by. Mason had followed Ella from school, so he knew she was at home. Wearing shorts and a t-shirt, she was in the kitchen. When she saw Mason, she started. Mason had a secret crush on her. At school, she was the object of desire for many young guys. It wasn't that she discouraged that. She didn't even support it. "Mason, why are you here?" she asked. "In your honor, I'm available to you." Clearly, he was erect. Ella was momentarily taken aback. Mason might have been interested if she hadn't been a student there. He was handsome and quite large. She was aware of a few of his adventures. Mason capitalized on Ella's brief silence before answering. He approached her and embraced her. She gave him a brief kiss in return. Then she realized what was going on and tried to back off. Bobby G took a paring knife in his hand. However, his mother suddenly distanced herself from Mason. She yelled for him to go. Mason moved past Bob G and backed out of the home. He walked away jogging. Ella Garrott failed to report what happened. Over the years, Bobby had put some money aside. He got an equalizer outside. It wasn't really much. A few days later, Mason appeared. Bobby answered the door once more. Mason stormed in. Bobby headed to his stash upstairs. Mason was on the floor when Bobby dropped him, and Ella was hugging him. Ella shrieked and Mason howled. Mason dropped on one knee. Ella made a call. Bobby put his hands up and raised his hands as he waited for the police to come. He spent a year in the juvie. Mason has partial paralysis in his left leg. Gerard had told his wife this story, and he wanted her to share it with Mac. She declined. "Sherry, this guy's real bad news," Gerard stated. "He'll go to any lengths to win you over. He is the type who thinks he can get away with doing stupid things." Sherry snorted. "He's a decent man, just erratic. I can handle him. Actually, please stay away from him," Gerard added. "Eat and drink away from him, even in the workplace." Her gaze was fixed on Gerard. "All right," she replied. "I suppose. In essence, the case is over. That's all when he arrives the next week." That, Sherry believed, put a stop to Gerard's discomfort. Not, Gerard thought to himself. After a few days, Gerard inquired about Mac. "Is he in town?" "Next week. We'll actually finish it all off then. After the documents are signed, there can be a party." "What sort of celebration?" "At lunch, or perhaps supper. Simon Blake has an idea for something. I'm not sure what." Says Gerard, "Don't leave. Don't eat or drink anything if you must go. This man is poisonous." "You're nuts, Gerard." "You lied once more, Sherry. You mentioned not knowing what to expect from the celebration. However, you do, correct?" She reddened and remained silent. "We have a family and kids," Gerard remarked. "But I have no boundaries, sure. Not on a mech. Now own up or we're done for." "This flat," he said. Sherry was alarmed by that. "It's dinner at the Hyatt downtown," Sherry declared. "I intended to inform you. I promise. Am I invited?" She paused. "Well, not precisely. Only the legal teams. But no one will complain if I come, right?" "I suppose not." "Gerard, you don't believe in me. I regret doing that. Tell me, my wife, when was I going to hear about the dinner?" Stillness. "Thus, without a doubt, I don't trust you. Why ought I to?" "Okay, you're invited. So, you'll come home after work and not have to cart that fancy dress that you have in the trunk to work." "Right. I wasn't going to lie, Perhaps a few dances. In actuality, you haven't met the man. You misread him. But I was aware that bad things might happen if you attended the meal. I'll believe anything you say. I recently bought a great suit. I also have a babysitter for the children. You have to be calm. I'll be calm if he keeps his hands off you. It's imperative that we dance. A minimum of once." "Nope. You most definitely don't. I really can't be impolite. He is a significant customer. Inform him this afternoon. If you have to, tell him the Bobby G story. But no touching, please." "Recognized." "Not at all. I don't comprehend." "Oh, yes you do." A chilly evening followed. Sherry was aware of Gerard's familial circumstances. The enormous lover of his mother and his diminutive father. She understood Gerard's concern about Mac. She therefore failed to see that Gerard was intelligent and a good people judge. She believed he was putting his early family circumstances on top of her Mac's circumstances. The evening of the meal was the last time she would see Mac. That Thursday, Gerard questioned Sherry about whether or not she had informed Mac that she wouldn't dance with him. "No," she replied. "He and I are going to dance. It's not a huge thing. Actually, to me, it is. I'm positive you get it. You know you've been lying to me about him all along. Sure, be advised. I refuse to watch him harass you on the dance floor." She chuckled. "How are you going to proceed?" "Battle him. I'll cut in," Gerard declared. "After I do that, he won't fight." Sherry didn't realize what that comment meant. Gerard's attempt to manipulate her did not sit well with her. She didn't really mean to let the guy down. Just a little dancing. Mac could warm her up a little. What could possibly go wrong? Gerard kept a close eye on her that night. It was evident to him that she was completely unconcerned with the possible outcome of the supper. When they got into bed, he gave it another go. He curled close to her. I want to make it clear to you that I think your attitude toward this guy is that you are being incredibly thoughtless and cruel to me," he added. "Everybody has their illogical fears and hang-ups. Mine is known to you. I'm not attempting to manipulate you. My goal is to salvage the situation." "You're being foolish," she remarked. She looked aside. He let out a sigh. He faced away from her. He'd made some arrangements in case. Sherry spoke with Mac in the office for a while the following day. Sherry did, as she had promised, return home to get ready for the dinner, which was to be held at a local hotel at 7 o'clock. Adjacent to the eating area was a dancing hall that frequently featured a live combo. Gerard changed into his new navy suit, the strong black tie. He kept a close eye on Sherry as she got dressed. He could tell she was anxious. He watched her put on modest underwear as well. He said, "So, you decided against the new light blue ones you have in the closet?" Sherry was surprised. She really was going to wear the finery. However, Gerard was there in the room. There's no doubt he would misunderstand. She was not going to let her spouse see the delicates. They belonged to her. "Yes," she replied. "They were offered for sale." "Yes, for $250. "Sure, tell me some more falsehoods. We seem to be going in the wrong direction. It would be quite unfortunate. We are parents. I am their primary home contact, you know. It's possible you won't get custody." "Gerard Bond, you are overreacting," she said. "No, sweetie, you are acting dishonestly, aggressive now. Do you really think I'll put up with that? I apologize for telling falsehoods. All I thought it would do was let you unwind. Nothing to be concerned about." Her delicate makeup was being ruined by her tears. Gerard made a phone call to confirm his plans while she was fixing that in the restroom. Gerard opened a credenza drawer close to the entrance as the two prepared to head out for supper. He produced his reliable ratchet knife. There was no hiding that from Sherry. Sherry let out a gasp. "What on earth?" she exclaimed. "Please, just a little defense. In the event of an emergency." He tucked it inside the pocket of his jacket. Sherry sighed and headed toward the car. Until they got to the location, she said nothing. The couple saw Mac and the other guests as they arrived at the hotel restaurant. There were 12 in all. There were 6 people working for Sherry's company, 5 for Mac, and Gerard on top. The other 4 employees of her firm were married, but he was the only spouse. Mac stood up and embraced Sherry. He turned to face Gerard, saying, "I see you made the decision to come. I presume in security." Gerard fixed the man with an expression devoid of emotion. He didn't say anything at all. Mac was not perturbed. Sherry was too. Sherry, however, was displeased with Mac rather than Gerard because of his needless and impolite remark. Gerard finally turned his back on Mac. His gaze was fixed on Mac's blue tie. "Nice tie," he said. Mac then turned his back on Gerard and got Sherry a chair by his side. Gerard sat down on her left, across from his wife. Gerard looked to Sherry as they sat down and said, "See." Mac became aware of this. Sherry gave a nod. "I do see. You were rude to my husband." She turned to face Mac. "I want you to know that this kind of conduct is really uncomfortable." Mac gave a nod. "Well, I guess it was a bit rude," he remarked. "I'm sorry. In particular, I don't want to offend you in the least." This was what he was telling Sherry. She gave a nod. "I really hope we can get along," she said. "While all of us have been working together, Gerard is a little worried." "Mac, I'm sure you get it." When the waiter came, he took orders. Gerard observed his wife and himself being served with great attention to detail. Gerard listened as Sherry and Mac continued their conversation during dinner. Maud Clark, an associate in Sherry's legal practice, was to his left. Gerard tried to talk to her, but he felt he should keep a close eye on Sherry and Mac. Maud comprehended. Ultimately, she conversed primarily with a man seated at the circular table to her left. There was dessert served. Gerard made it through. It was Sherry's ice cream. Mac was eating some fluffy pastry. "All to the dance floor," exclaimed Mac as the plates were being cleaned. Sherry turned to Gerard as soon as he sought to grasp her hand, and he led her out of the venue by Mac. A trio started playing softly at the table the group had set up near the ground. The lights were dim. Sherry and Gerard stepped out onto the ground. They performed 3 dance routines. They were both skilled dancers and adored the art. Gerard remarked, "Mac is impolite and essentially uncivilized," as they danced. "I detest him utterly." Sherry answered. He became calm. "Maybe he felt let down to see you here." Sherry chuckled. "That's not necessary, I'll have to dance with him, though. Avoid doing it. Refuse with grace. It seems like a prerequisite for the job. Here are my superiors." Mac got up and held out his hand to Sherry as they took their seats at the table again. He avoided glancing at Gerard. Sherry gave it a quick look, but she grabbed Mac's hand and followed him to the ground. Mac was a good boy throughout their 2 dances together. He wasn't clingy or possessive. Sherry was led back to the table by him. "Can I get you and Gerard something from the bar?" he said as she sat down. Gerard observed Mac approach the bar. A male and 2 ladies made up the 3 employees. One of the women wasn't busy, but the man was. However, Mac bided his time until the man faced him. Gerard scratched his neck and reached behind his head when he noticed it. Mac brought the wine back to the table. A young woman approached the table and expressed her gratitude to Sherry. After giving her his wine, Gerard grabbed the sherries that were in front of her. The woman filled a disposable sample cup with some of Gerard's wine. After that, she returned his wine to him and gave Sherry's wine the same treatment. Melanie, the woman's name, was closing the second cup when Mac looked aside to see what was going on. She turned and began to leave. Sherry was gazing at this while seated at the table. The other people present were shocked. Sherry seemed almost desperate. When Mac realized what had transpired, he let out a roar. He yelled, "Get rid of that woman. Put an end to her." Immediately, two huge but well-dressed men replied. However, Melanie had vanished. Before Mac's two allies could come back, Mac turned to face Gerard, who was now free from the table and prepared. He was prepared to flick open his ratchet knife. The gears were sharpened. It was not so much a tool as a weapon. Mac was yelling at Gerard, furious. "You filthy little kid." Mac extended his hands and gripped, charging. Gerard snipped his necktie, just below the knot. The tie dropped to the ground. Gerard sidestepped Mac. Mac faltered and collapsed to the ground, panting. Gerard and the other spectators were taken aback by this turn of events. There was quiet for a while. Gerard realized he hadn't even made contact with Mac. He diagnosed it as an instance of what was formerly known as apoplexy, or a heart attack. From his cell, Gerard called the ambulance. This was his second call regarding the issue. It was Mac's personal assistant who made the first call. Maxie was her name. She was subtle in her look or tude. Maxie crouched over Mac and undid the remnants of his opulent neckwear. She began CPR. She was kneeling next to Gerard when he said, "You take the mouth." He began to press on Mac's enormous chest while Maxie kissed him. Medics arrived soon after and took control. They shocked me. Pumped one more time. Not successful. He was wheeled out to the ambulance. Maxie followed suit. Gerard stood up from the floor where he had been seated and observing the medical personnel. Bending over, he took up the blue tie. The silk was soft and silky, and the design was modest yet exquisite, leaving him in awe. In an attempt to see if he could order one for himself, he shoved it inside his pocket. Next, he searched the area for Sherry. She remained sitting at the table, receiving consolation from Linda, a colleague. Gerard questioned Linda's motivation for consoling Sherry. However, he approached her. "Sure, we should go," he said. She gave a nod. He gave her some assistance. He noticed Linda was staring at him with a dagger. Still, he brought Sherry home with him. Sherry went straight to bed after they returned. She learned about Mac's death in the hospital early the following morning. Before that call, she was fine. But then she began to cry. Gerard endured it. 10 minutes later, she stopped. She said, "He really wasn't as screwed up as it seemed last night." "Indeed he was," Gerard said. "Even worse." "Who was that woman?" inquired Sherry. "Someone from the lab I hired." "Oh," she exclaimed. Gerard gave her a long look. "Perhaps you were correct about him," she said. He did respond to her. Gerard gave a nod. All he said was, "Yep." There was little communication between the two during the weekend. Sherry looked melancholy. Two investigators from the MPD stopped by the home on Sunday. They desired to speak with the pair. The female investigator stayed with Sherry, and they requested Gerard to go outside. Mark, the male, inquired about the events that had transpired. Still, he had seen the footage and knew exactly what had transpired. He posed the question that truly piqued his curiosity at the conclusion of the brief interview. "How in the world did you use the tie like that?" "I watched the film in slow motion. It's astounding." Gerard grinned. "When I was much younger, I spent the summer and fall with my dad in Jamaica while he worked on a project," he remarked. "I got the knife from a guy who was taking care of me. I was proficient in the things he taught me. I occasionally work on it. You have the option to cut the man. It was really dangerous." "No," replied Gerard. "It wasn't all that dangerous." You observed. Detective Annie Marlowe questioned Sherry about the evening and Mac in the meanwhile. She was curious about Sherry's connection to Mac. Sherry declared, "None existed. Simply put, work. Not what I heard. You see, I turned him off when he was pursuing me. The last day of festivities was Friday. That concludes it. He was staying at a hotel. When he was renting an apartment, why was that the case? I couldn't say." Detective Annie Marlowe gave a nod. A large infarction was revealed by the autopsy. The detective felt Sherry was fortunate to have escaped being crushed beneath Mac's massive weight against a bed. That's not what she said, though. The policeman departed. About the wine samples, neither of them had inquired. Given that the potential perp was no longer alive, Gerard reasoned that the police were probably not interested. Gerard believed that the dead one was the only one. Perhaps there is one more, maybe two. He received the lab results back on Monday. His wine was a strong concoction, having been infused with X and a dose of sedative. That's what Sherry's wine was. Wine. When that specific bartender became available, Mac waited at the bar, as Gerard told Buffer over the phone. He explained about the bartender. He also explained the contents of his wine. Buffer promised to look into it. Gerard then proceeded to a posh men's boutique to find a tie similar to the one Mac was wearing. Of course, Gerard had a sample. Such a tie was in the store. $255. Gerard purchased one. Gerard saw a family law attorney Tuesday morning. The tie was on him. My comment: would you have done the same as OP? What would you do when you find out about the affair? Comment down below, sub and bell, and I will catch you in the next one.